Hey guys, I wanted to do a quick video today on this crazy and truly historic event that just happened. So, as we all know, recently, the Francis Scott Key Bridge, the largest bridge in Baltimore, collapsed after one of its pillars was hit with a boat the size of a skyscraper. In just a few terrible seconds, the impact triggered an absolute meltdown of the bridge's superstructure, leading it to crumble and plunge 185 feet to the icy waters of the Patapsco River below. This matters for numerous reasons, including ones related to regional travel, global shipping, and American politics. And we're going to touch on all of those today, but guys, before we get into our deep dive here, we of course need to remember with disasters such as these that it is always important to first consider the human element. And the first part of that I want to take a look at today is the effect that this will have on culture, history, and the intersection of the two. Surely the people who were there that night knew that they were not just witnessing a nearly cinematic destruction scene, but the destruction of history, as for 47 good years, this marvel of American engineering upheld more than just concrete and steel beams. It upheld the legacy of an American icon, Francis Scott Key. Born in Carroll County, Maryland in 1779, this American hero and lawyer lived through that great crucible of the nation's boyhood, the War of 1812. And, of course, it was during this time that he gave his greatest contribution to his nation. A poem written in the heat of battle, which would later go on to become the Star-Spangled Banner. He set his inspired original lyrics to the tune of a British Gentleman's Club theme song, and in doing so, created a national anthem and cemented his legacy as the greatest songwriter among founding father-esque figures. His shining moment came during the Battle of Baltimore in September 1814, as he watched the great and terrible British bombardment of Fort McHenry, helplessly trapped aboard an enemy ship. To give some context to the non-American viewers of the channel, as night fell over Baltimore on the 14th of September, 1814, the American war effort was in dire straits. The British Army had burned Washington, D.C. to the ground hardly a fortnight prior, and was moving on to Baltimore by both land and sea. As the Royal Navy entered Baltimore Harbor and opened fire upon Fort McHenry, it was well understood by many of the American defenders that, if the fort fell, so too would Baltimore, and then the nation as a whole. Indeed, the American experiment and the world's interest in democracy hung in the balance, hinging on the bravery of this one small fort. The British began their bombardment with a fury, firing wave after wave of cannonballs from their mighty warships. The sight and sound was awesome and terrifying to the citizens of Baltimore and the American soldiers, who watched wide-eyed as rockets cast a red glare and exploded in mid-air. Just as it felt like the barrage would never end, the night began to fade and the bombs let up, and in the early light of dawn, as the smoke cleared, the stars and stripes emerged from the clouds, still waving. The fort had withstood the British attack. America was no longer a boy. Of course, guys, America went on to win that war, with this epic and pivotal battle serving as the muse for Francis Scott Key's magnum opus, as, famously, he wrote the lyrics to the Star-Spangled Banner while being held aboard an enemy ship, having just negotiated the release of an American prisoner of war, and now forced to watch the devastating bombardment of his countrymen. A creative feat this generation's artists wouldn't dream of attempting today. So guys, I wanted to do a little Google Maps thing here to help visualize the situation. So here we've got downtown Baltimore, and then here on this peninsula tip is Fort McHenry. You can even see the Francis Scott Key Bridge, and it says here, temporarily closed, very diplomatic of Google. Now, the British are coming up from DC, and their ships are coming up the Patapsco River. They enter the harbor and start said bombing of Fort McHenry, so it would have been somewhere around here that Francis Scott Key was watching the battle and writing his little poem. So, guys, with all of that context under our belt now, what does this bridge being wiped off the map mean for the legacy of Francis Scott Key? Well, only time will tell, but naturally, it is a huge blow to his enduring fame, and it puts massive pressure on the other bridge named Francis Scott Key Bridge, which was built in 1923 and is located some 200 miles away, spanning the Potomac River between Washington, D.C. and Arlington, Virginia. Undoubtedly, the collapse of this bridge could be a death blow to the infrastructure-related notoriety of this human treasure. However, there is reason to feel assured in this area, as the first Francis Scott Key Bridge is constructed out of reinforced concrete and steel beams, and utilizes the very powerful open spandrel arch structure. This compared to the steel and truss structure of the deceased, which sort of just looks less sturdy. Additionally, the builders of the original bridge took steps that entirely circumvent the problem faced by the second, as the clearance for ships passing under the deck is a mere 60 feet, instead of the departed's 185, thereby only allowing for boats the size of, say, a townhouse, which lack the kinetic energy required for a complete bridge failure. Therefore, it seems that this bridge, which has not just historical value but also aesthetic value, will continue to stand strong. So, the hero's legacy may have taken a blow, but it seems likely he will enjoy at least the same level of fame for still some time to come. But in the present, there are questions to be answered, and the region's infrastructure is shot. Shipping has probably ground to a halt, and all the while, there's a bridge to be built. Now, the formerly intact Francis Scott Key Bridge carried Interstate 695 over the Patapsco River as part of the Baltimore Beltway, this handy little loop of freeway that lets you get anywhere in the vicinity of Baltimore. One fun fact about the bridge is that it was a vital shipping route for trucks, as the nearby Fort McHenry Tunnel and Baltimore Harbor Tunnel do not allow vehicles with hazardous loads. So, as with any civil engineering project, there is bound to be a ton of red tape and delays on getting this bridge built. Because, as useful and sometimes beautiful as bridges are, they are also extremely expensive. Now, there is a scenario where the government could quickly establish some funding sources to get this project going, but it's generally more likely that funding becomes difficult and/or problematic, so probably no one is holding their breath on that. And that may be okay, because while I feel like they could probably just do a straight-up remake, they may want to take some time to design just a different bridge. So the chances of having a new Francis Scott Key Bridge before the November election are slim at best. And guys, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that if I didn't believe in coincidences, I would probably say it's very interesting that this happened so close to Washington, D.C. I mean, Baltimore is right in the White House's backyard. Perhaps they let the weeds grow a little tall. Perhaps this deserves a closer look, and one obvious question is, where is Biden for all of this? 'Cause it seems like he's been spending a lot of time at the southern border. Shrewd observers will notice the potential for double messaging here, as the standard metaphor for a border is a bridge. Presumably, POTUS wants to build bridges, not see them torn down. So any amount of touching the border right now can really only muddy the waters. That's probably what I would say. Now, the governments will certainly have their own responses to this incident, but in the meantime, presumably Biden is busy remembering that with disasters such as these, it is always important to first consider the human element. And guys, the next part of that I want to take a look at today is how this tragic event will affect culture, individual people, and the intersection of the two. Of course, Most of us will not, and in truth, cannot even begin to imagine what this event was like for those who were involved in or connected to it. And in what is a very human response, that distance really matters for this much larger group of people. Guys, the experience of these people is very real, and collectively, it plays a major role in the general health of the national psyche, people who are afraid of bridges, and the cultural and political response. Of course, these last two things are deeply intertwined with the long held concern that events such as these largely function to reinvigorate the public's love for seeing the destruction of national landmarks on screen. There is a ton of footage that I wasn't sure if I was allowed to show, but I think we can all picture some scenes from movies where a bunch of different important buildings or bridges or statues get totally destroyed. And we know that this is awesome, as much as we know that it is bad. The Francis Scott Key Bridge was no beauty queen, but the image of its collapse could remind and remotivate the nation's latent desire to see the fictional destruction of bridges that are more essential to the national brand, with the feared outcome being an influx, a few years from now, of disaster films, ill-conceived and rushed through production. My intention is certainly not to contribute to any concerns, but I do think that while we cannot forget the situation on the ground, these are the types of fallout that linger above tragic and unfortunate happenings, often far in the background. I think this is a testament to how a single event can have major ramifications, how a disaster in one area can infect an entire nation, and just how complex the aftermath can become. What is for certain is the bridge is gone, and none of us can put it back up. For us everyday citizens, the trial's over, but as always, there's a much more complicated game being played behind the scenes. So that's it for our video today, guys. Again, I wanted to get something out on this topic because it is a super interesting and layered event that is still developing. And as promised, guys, I'll be doing some more current event videos in the future as cool things happen, so stay tuned for those. And until then, I just want to say thanks a ton for watching, guys. Your support means the world to us content creators. I think this is a pretty good video, and I'm so excited to share it with you all today and to get to hear what you guys think. I love the community that we're building here, and I guess that being said, guys, have an awesome day and stay safe out there. I'll see you next time.